Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President, and it's great to rise to speak on this Greens motion. It's great to see the Greens want to take some action on corporate tax evasion. So hopefully, Mr Deputy President, they will support the government's bill to clamp down on R&D issues for large companies. My understanding is the Greens aren't supporting that. Certainly the Labor Party aren't supporting it right now. So all these comments we're hearing today about wanting to tax corporations more, apparently, that's all just empty rhetoric, because we have a bill in front of this parliament right now, we heard about it at question time as well, that would reduce deductions for companies that have a turnover of more than $20 billion. Not small companies, these are big companies, the kind of companies the Greens don't typically like, Rio Tinto, BHP. And we've decided as a government that they should fund their R&D themselves. Indeed, the Labor Party came to the same conclusion just a year ago when they were in government. They should fund their own R&D. But right now, those changes are being held up by, wait for it, the very people that have moved this motion today, saying that corporations don't pay enough tax. So when we hear from the Greens about how this Tax Justice Network report shows that companies don't pay enough tax, well, they don't pay that tax because the deductions they're allowed to make. And some of those deductions are to do with research. A big part of those deductions are to do with research and development incentives, which the Greens want to keep for big companies. They want to keep them. Now, Senator Heffernan before asked for some facts too, and I think, yep, that's fair enough. We should have some facts. Well, you might not like my facts, Senator Heffernan, but they are facts. Corporations in Australia pay more as a percentage. We raise more corporate tax in Australia as a percentage of GDP than almost any other OECD nation. I agree it's a global phenomenon, but we are also talking about Australia's issues here, Senator Heffernan, and our companies pay 4.5% of GDP in corporate tax. It was as high as 7% in the peak of the mining boom. The average in the OECD, which has been pretty flat over the last decade, the average is 3%, and we're at 4.5%. We're at 4.5%. So we in this country don't necessarily have a domestic issue with base erosion and profit shifting, but nonetheless, I agree with Senator Heffernan that it is a global issue that needs some action. So when we hear Senator Dastyari also complain about the ATO not having enough staff, it's another example of hypocrisy in this debate, because as we learnt in Senate estimates the other day in the Economics Committee, which I think Senator Dastyari was at the time, the tax office clearly outlined that the 4,000-odd staff that they'll be reducing over the next 4 years are a direct consequence of the efficiency dividends placed on them by the former Green Labor government. The former Green Labor government put in place those efficiency dividends on the tax office. They didn't have the guts to outline how many staff that would mean, but their reduction in funding was made under the Green Labor government. And of course, when something like the tax office, when I'm sure something like 70 or 80% of their costs would be in wages, the only way they're going to fund those efficiency dividends is to reduce the staff, and that's what they've had to do. Now, given the tight budget, we of course are maintaining those efficiency dividends, but there is no, just as in the Labor government when they announced those efficiency dividends, they made no change to the tax revenue that would be raised over the next few years, and likewise we've made no changes either. Now, both Green senators have also raised the issue of Treasury and the fact that Mr Parkinson said in a speech last week or sometime recently that there are vested interests that are controlling this country. Well, I'm not going to dispute the Treasury on their statements in that regard, but I was surprised that the Green senators raised Treasury in this debate, because one thing they didn't raise, though, is the evidence that Treasury gave at the last Senate estimates. So Senate estimates were only 3 or 4 weeks ago, and at that committee, Mr Heffernan, who is the I think head of fiscal group in Treasury, and I asked him very directly, do you think the report, we were discussing the Tax Justice Network report that Senator Millen raised earlier, do you think the report was misleading? Mr Heffernan, yes. Yes, it was. Yes, that was the simple answer. It was misleading. Well, it was misleading, Senator Heffernan, because they mixed up, as Senator Edwards said before, gross and taxable income. They had the wrong evidence on debt and equity ratios for overseas countries, for Australian countries using capitalisation rules, and they also included in a table the average tax rates. They included companies that pay zero tax, including trusts as well, Senator Heffernan, and that lowered their average. So this idea there's an $8 billion magic pie out there is incorrect in regards to Australia. But if the Greens and Labor Party want to do something about corporate tax erosion in this country, support the R&D bill. Don't just support motions in this House.